Someone recently asked me in the comments section of one of my own videos, what, we know that there are skeptical people out there, and we hear from them fairly regularly, but what about the skeptics in the medical community skeptical of circumcision? I believe he was particularly referencing people of medical school age. Particularly the younger people. He thought there should have been more of them speaking out, or just that, theoretically we should see them in greater numbers if they're out there. My answer to that was essentially the type of person that's smart enough to go to medical school also tends to be probably rather docile and not too likely to question authority, and probably fearful of authority if they start raising too much of a ruckus within the context of their medical school. We know medical schools have, I don't know, it seemed like in the past they would not force their residents to perform infant circumcisions, but recently that seems to be the case. They seem to be very enthusiastic. They seem very set on making sure that all of their medical students have in some way been an accomplice to infant circumcision. Anyway, that was my simple answer to that question. I think it's probably about correct, but it raised a much bigger question in my mind, which is, what the previous question was about these young doctors witnessing, living in an age where circumcision is becoming less common. Intactivists are becoming more vocal. My question is, what are the large medical organizations, when these intactivists, when these doctors going to these big committee meetings pass by these raging mad intactivists, pointing at them and calling them child rapists, and then going into their American Academy of Pediatrics and American Medical Association and ACOG conferences. What on earth is going on inside after all of the attendees walk past the intactivist protests? That's my question. And what does the future hold with regard to that? And I'm not entirely sure. There's a couple things that tend to suggest what may happen in the short and intermediate term. Less telling on what it means for the long term. For the short and intermediate term, it means, I believe that it means, well, there's two telling things. Let me say that first. The first thing is one of Douglas Dykema's quote. I believe it was him. It might have been Friedman, but I think it was Dykema, who was quoted as saying, he acknowledges that the anti-circumcision position is essentially a human rights position. And his quote was, human rights is not a convincing ethical framework, or human rights is not the only convincing ethical framework. That's point number one. And point number two is the fact that Douglas Dykema now needs bodyguards, or has bodyguards. I think these are telling things, and I think what they tell us is that the medical community is going to they're simply going to flat out ignore the physical integrity, human rights, forced amputation criticism that we levy to them, levy against them. They're simply going to ignore that, and they're probably going to dig in their heels. Short and intermediate term, I think that's what's going to happen. And those two things are the sort of my reasoning behind that. There is an event recently that may change that. I don't know if any of you noticed, but Steven Svoboda at Attorneys for the Rights of the Child, sort of the premier circumcision lawsuit, organization, legal organization dedicated pretty much exclusively to circumcision law and lawsuits, recently got an article published in the American Academy of Pediatrics. I believe it was the AAP's. Could have been the AMA's. I think it was the AAP's journal, and it was a hard-hitting, fundamental criticism of the fundamental underlying ethical problems of infant circumcision. And we can talk about that more probably in another video. We can get into the details of that. But the fact that that happened is kind of breathtaking. It kind of strikes against what I was saying previously. I mean, I don't know what's going on. I know this is not official policy, but how does this get approved? This must have gotten by some committee in order to get published. Is there a revolution afoot within the American medical organizations? I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on. We'll have to look into things. We'll have to wait and see what's going on. So tell me what you think. Tell me what you think is going on, or tell me what you think the short and intermediate term trends are going to be coming out of American medical organizations. Tell me what you think the long-term implications are. I personally think that one of the long-term implications is circumcision may end up going the way of the dodo bird, but the medical community will never end up taking responsibility for it. In the same way, like I said earlier, the medical community really never apologized for all of its previous human rights violations of insulin shock therapy, electroshock therapy of homosexuals, insulin shock therapy of the mentally ill, castration, and even euthanasia of people considered defectives, frontal lobotomy, female circumcision. They never were held liable or even admitted guilt, really, on a total system level scale. And certainly infant circumcision is a system level problem to the degree that none of the things I mentioned even got close to. That's sort of a long-term prediction. But tell me what you think. Tell me what your short, intermediate, and long-term predictions are, and tell me what you think about this Steven Svoboda criticism blasting infant circumcision. Just came out in the journal August 2017. Tell me what you think. Some of you may have been disturbed by my personal predictions for the behavior of the American medical community in the short, medium, and long term. Keep in mind, my entire position on the issue of infant circumcision is that it is not medical. It is not medical, and it is a human rights violation. It is simply outside of the purview of medicine. I don't, quite frankly, care what doctors have to say about it. I think their role is overblown. I think it may actually hurt the movement if we try to focus too much on the medical aspects of it. I mean, we do need to explain the harms, but in general, I think circumcision is going to decline and die and be banned against the will and over the protestations of the American medical community. And that's okay. That's why I'm not. It's not a black pill for me to think that the medical community is going to be terrible for many years to come on this issue. And keep your expectations low, and maybe they'll surprise us. Like I'm saying with this Steven Svoboda article in one of their medical journals. We'll see where it goes. Again, tell me what you think.